Hello and welcome. This is a part 2 video. This is the assembly of this Seiko 6106C. There is a previous video that shows the disassembly and some of the problems I encountered with that, including one of Seiko's non-traditional shock setting springs that it uses in some of its movements. And from the looks of the outside of this watch, you can see that it wasn't particularly cared for all that well, at least in the recent time. First thing in assembly is I noticed that this hairspring is not quite right. It's off center. You can see it wants to naturally push the pivot away from the pivot hole, away from the jewel. So that's not going to run very well. I really am not very good at working with hairsprings, and I really would like to try avoiding this. So I'm going to test it in the spare movement that I have for a future project, and well, that's just not going to work. So we're going to have to figure something out. So I removed the balance wheel from the balance cock, and well, that hairspring is supposed to be not only concentric but also flat. So clearly this spring isn't going to work the way it is, so I pry it off gently with a small screwdriver underneath the collet against the wheel here. And I'm going to see what we can do as far as salvaging this hairspring. Here's another view of that hairspring. I just dread working on these. And my success rate, as I mentioned, is not very good with these, but I figure even though I may not be successful every time, I'm learning each time that I do it, and hopefully that success rate will change for the better. Some fiddling off camera, I do get it to be at least a little flatter. And you know, while I had this spring off, I'm just out of curiosity, I threw the balance wheel back in this movement to kind of see how the, you know, I guess check the pivots, and it spins pretty freely, so pivots look good. So even though this hairspring looks a little mangled, I mount it back to the balance wheel, and you know, you do have to make sure you make marks so that you have the impact jewel in the right position. During some off-camera swearing, I manipulate the spring into a little bit better shape, get everything back together and the balance complete, and we're going to throw this into the movement and see how well the balance oscillates on this spring. And it looks like it might work. I've seen better. Usually this would run a little bit longer than what we're seeing here, but you know, to save a part and some time, it's worth trying. So we're going to go ahead and lubricate the center jewel and get our first wheel in. And we're going to go ahead and put in our escape wheel. Ease that in. And we'll get this, I guess it's not a bridge, but this first cock over the center wheel. And try and position the escape wheel back. A little tap, sometimes it'll fall into the pivot. I like to try and keep the center escape wheel in place if I can. Now this is the first time I've actually worked on a Seiko with a hack. This spring, I guess, you know, when you pull the stem out to set the time, it nudges along the pivot here to stop the watch from running, so you can set the time more accurately. And well, my experience with where this goes, I'm trying to figure out where it goes. That's why I've fiddled around with it so much. I'm going to lubricate the hole where the barrel wheel goes, that holds the mainspring that powers the watch. And it does rotate. So get our next wheel in. Check the rotation just a bit. Things aren't quite, you know, secured into place, so they're not always going to spin freely or very well, but just I like to check just a little bit, a little nudge to make sure things are engaged the right way. And after manipulating the escape wheel a little bit, see how lucky we are getting our train wheel bridge over all these pivots. Sometimes this goes very quickly when you're lucky. And when you're not lucky, this can go on for long enough for a cup of tea or a sip of whiskey. I'm a bourbon guy myself. Unless it's the morning, then it's tea or coffee. But yeah, so after checking the wheel rotation a little bit, things look good. You want to be really careful tightening these screws on this bridge, even if you think you've got it, because if you don't, you're going to damage something. And it's just better to go slow and take your time and gently ease these screws down as you go and check along the way. I'll put a little lubrication on top of the barrel arbor there. I'll drop this wheel over the top of the arbor. And I realize I've forgotten something, the click. So this click is a very different design from the first watches I worked on, which were, I guess, more the European design with a little spring and a little lever, almost sort of a notched washer in shape. This is a very simple design, but I find it a little hard to get it back on, so sometimes I have to work with that a little bit to hold the screw and the spring in place with the tweezers as I try and get the screw in. And now we can get that wheel over the arbor there. This is one of the larger screws. You think it would be easier. And I'm going to use a little piece of pegwood here to hold the wheel in place to tighten it. Okay, now this is the pallet fork. Now in the previous video, you'll see how I'm having to use a new pallet fork, not a new one, but a donor pallet fork, because one of the stones on the fork that came with this was completely out of alignment. So that might be another project. I might play around to see how I can see if I can fix that. I know they can be fixed. The question is, can I fix it? Again, this is another one of those situations where, after you get the bridge, in this case, since there are multiple screws on the pallet fork, you want to ease these down. It's so little benefit into rushing through, oh, think I got it, and just drill those screws down. You just want to gently work those screws on each side, check operation, and then finish tightening down. Oops. Don't tell anybody I slipped. And we'll just check that the fork moves freely back and forth. Really, you do this multiple times as you're tightening, and we're going to move to the dial side. Get this large spring lever on. I mean, this is one of the largest screws in the movement. You'd think this would be a little easier. It's funny though how sometimes the screws can drop right into place on accident. And sometimes you'll push a screw around like a pea on a plate. All right, we'll drop our sliding pinion in and grease that up. I got a little sloppy, so try and clean that up a little bit. this little wheel here on to its post, just next to the sliding pinion. And a little grease here. Get this lever here on. Make sure that this goes into the slot for the sliding pinion. And then once that's set, you can drag that spring over. But I'm going to put a little bit of grease here before I do that. Well, before it has tension, so that I can get the grease in between the parts there. And actually, now we'll get this cover on, which also has a spring built into it. Now I like to kind of, again, tighten these part way. Ease this screw in there. Really? Again? I wish tweezers had screwdrivers on the other end. All right, I'm just going to get the stem in here and just kind of check things a little bit, add a little lubrication there. Part of it is, with the stem in there, it kind of reminds me of the mechanics and where the contact is as things move. So, you know, I haven't been doing this for years and years and years, so, you know, I need a little help sometimes remembering how things work. And now we can get this spring, this large spring set. I guess set correctly. And that will help provide tension for the date set and day. And if you push the crown in, you can see that lever pushes on that spring. It's amazing how much tension that spring has, and it's amazing these things, how robust these things are. Okay, back to the train and wheels side. We're gonna get our, well, less than 100% balance back in here. And we'll see, see how well it might work. Ease the pivot in and ease it over the mounting posts and get the screw hole aligned. And we'll chase some screws around. Of course, you know, what we love to see is that balance start swinging immediately when you drop it into the pivot, but maybe it's the hacking mechanism, but you know, when I move the stem, you can see the hacking mechanism between those portholes move, but this balance just isn't swinging yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and mount this in and come back to it. Yeah, so we'll tighten this down and then we'll flip it over to finish the calendar work side. And this little wheel, well, I had put it on earlier, as you might remember, and it fell out after I turned it over to put the balance wheel in. So, rookie move. And we'll get our cannon pinion on, push that down with a little snap. If you don't feel a little snap, that might not be a very positive sign. Sometimes they need to be tightened up. Get this setting wheel on. I try to be gentle with these, kind of move things around. Don't force the teeth in there. Get our Calendar Works wheels in. Now that's a little nylon wheel. Again, you want to very gently manipulate those teeth together so that they mesh and not really force those in. This is another little plastic or nylon. It's synthetic material. And this is a little shouldered screw. So be sure not to get that confused and mounted somewhere where it doesn't belong. And see if I can remember where this little piece goes. Kind of looks like a squat little duck. Sometimes I can figure out exactly where it goes. Sometimes I think I know, and sometimes I wonder if I've got it mixed up from parts with another watch. But I have pictures and I have video, of course, but I don't know, sometimes it's fun just to try and challenge yourself to figure it out mechanically by looking at it. This thing is almost done, but will it run? Get this little spring in here for the date wheel. It will fly off. I've seen these really fly several feet before. It's large, so you can probably find it, but I think I'll skip that fun for today and use a little piece of pegwood to hold that down. Okay, let's take a really close look at these jewel settings. These are shock settings, or anti-shock settings. Now you might be familiar with Inca Block, and they look a little similar in that they're prongs with a tab on the other end. And with Inca Block, you pry the prongs out of the setting and it flips up as if it were on a hinge. Seiko's DiaShock works, well, it's opposite of that. The way that it works is that you leave those forks in there and you pry the other end, you pry the tab free, and then it pivots like a hinge on those legs on the forked end. And the temptation, I think, for a lot of people to treat it like Inca Block, often what happens is it comes out and gets damaged. It's very hard to get back in. What I do is I put a little piece of wood down and I take my oiler and I just press on this side to reveal that tab. There's a little grooved recess there that holds that spring in place. Now this is much more similar to what you see in other movements. This clover shaped spring has a tab on each end of those prongs or leaves, we'll call it. And what you do is you take tweezers and you spin it around underneath that recess. And there's a break in the recess where you can free each tab one by one. You access your jewel, get it back in there, and you put it in the same way. You do want to keep it secured because it can fly off. After getting the shock settings taken care of off camera, we'll get our date wheel on. And when you get the date wheel on, you do have to manipulate the spring a little bit to kind of go into one of the little notches. I guess in between the teeth, you would say. And it actually kind of slides into place. You can feel it once it's in there. And this cover plate, sometimes I have to puzzle that out. It seems so obvious once you get it close, but once you first pick it up, you're not even sure if you have the right side up. And this is horrible practice, by the way, as far as, or technique, I should say. You really should put a screw in, tighten it part way, the next screw, tighten it part way, and so on, rather than all these screws and then tighten. Because if something goes wrong, the movement tips or something happens, it's just the worst way to do it. Get our day wheel in. And underneath the day wheel is another spring. I manipulate that with the tweezers. I'm going to be very, very careful to not scratch anything. Didn't quite get it. Go for another attempt here. And there. Right on the center of the dial, it mentions about which way to mount this ring. And there's a beveled edge, and that beveled edge goes face down. So beveled edge down. And the reason you want that down is it makes it easier to get a tool in there to pry it off when it needs service again. So I have to snap that on. And let's check to make sure that the date and the day change over and everything feels okay. And that seems good. And we'll need to get our dial screws loosened. I tighten them up so that they don't get lost. They are pretty small and easy to lose. Get our dial spacer and our dial in. And gently tighten these back in. You might notice that the balance is spinning now, which I was happy to see. I figured I'd let this run a little bit. A day or two and see if that balance will work as it is. And we'll get our date set at midnight. Well, it's going to be midnight once we get these hands on. I just use these little hand press tools. And we'll check to make sure our operation of the hour hand is okay. And see where it flips over as far as position. That's pretty close. You'll see I like to use Rodico on one end of the hand, at the tip of the hand, and sort of hover it in place and press with the hand tool. And we'll check operation of the hands again. One area I like to really watch as far as interference is sometimes there can be a little interference right there at the date window. So I kind of like to rotate that through slowly sometimes just to make sure that there's a little, well, not just minimal clearance, but really a little, a little bit of a cushion, I guess, some leeway there. I really like this dial. It's very electric. And his indices are very aggressive, fang-like. And you can see the second hand stopped with the hack. This is just a really nice looking dial. You can see it's got like the sunburst, but also has a kind of a swirl, very slight swirl pattern to it too. It's really nice to see this thing ticking away. I really had some doubts earlier. All right, let's move forward and getting this thing back together. You can see this is the original crystal. It's faceted. It's in really rough shape, and that's not going to polish out. And honestly, for what a replacement crystal costs, I'm not even sure that I like it. But this is kind of give you an idea of what this watch would look like. It's definitely bold, and you know, I don't hate it, but I don't love it. And I think it actually makes it a little hard to read the time. And I think I'm gonna go more for a vintage acrylic, maybe a high dome. It'll be a little different vibe, but it'll still have a vintage feel to it. And this is how this watch came to me. It was a non-runner and, well, had been clearly neglected. And for the big reveal, I think it has come out really well. I love this watch. That blue just pops. Now, I did polish it some, but I left a few nicks in here. It's honest. I love the distortion of that acrylic crystal. And since you're still watching this video to this point, I really want to thank you. It's really hard to believe just how much work these videos are. One small thing you can do to help me is to click the like button and subscribe. Along with learning watchmaking, I'm learning how to make these videos better. So any comments you have or suggestions, I'd really appreciate that too. So in the meantime, take care, and I hope to see you soon in the next one.